Republicans, they've moved from saying the quiet part out loud to basically flying it on one of those banners towed behind one of those airplanes. Because in the midst of blocking the promotion of 2 black and 2 female Army officers, while allowing the promotions of other white males to move forward, Pete Hegseth's chief of staff accidentally typed an entire MAGA military agenda essentially onto a whiteboard and handed it to the New York Times, which also ends up giving a little bit more evidence that Donald Trump is possibly a racist. And to understand why this happened, I want to start by talking about the Secretary of Defense and how he is systematically removing women and black officers from military leadership. And you need to understand that this isn't just what Pete Hegseth is doing. You need to understand what Pete Hegseth believes at his core. And we've talked about his pastor before, Douglas Wilson. We talked about him plenty. He's a pastor, an author, the founder of Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. He's a self-described Christian nationalist. And this is the man that Pete Hegseth has publicly called a mentor. I mean, in February, Hegseth invited Wilson to preach at the Pentagon in a monthly Christian worship service that Hegseth started last May inside the Department of Defense. And it's broadcast live on the Pentagon's internal TV network with government emails sent to the service members inviting them to attend. And a refresher on what this Christian Douglas Wilson believes that women shouldn't have the right to vote. His church doesn't allow women to hold leadership positions or even vote in congregational decisions. He's argued that families should vote as households, aka the husband and father is the only one that casts a vote. He's argued that enslaved people in the antebellum South had an affectionate relationship with their owners, and that Christian slave owners were on firm scriptural ground. He also believes that homosexuality should be recriminalized. The Supreme Court invalidated sodomy laws in 2003. Wilson would like to reverse that too. And he's described, this is shocking, democracy as foolishness. And he's advocated for the wholesale conversion of the United States into a Christian theocracy operating under Old Testament law. He is the MAGA Taliban. And Hegseth? Well, when CNN ran a profile of Wilson, which included his opinions about women, Hegseth reposted that video to his social media with the caption, "All of Christ for all of life," which is Wilson's church tagline. Wilson himself told the AP that Hegseth was in effect reposting it and saying, "Amen," at some level. Meanwhile, people are looking for accountability here. Senator Tammy Duckworth, an Army helicopter pilot, lost both legs in combat in Iraq, called the repost antiquated, flat out wrong, and designed to justify discrimination and mistreatment of women, including those who sacrifice in uniform to defend Americans. Went on to call Hegseth the least qualified Secretary of Defense in our nation's history. Have to agree. I mean, female veterans in Congress are demanding that he resign, and it's another call for his resignation. This is not the first time. And when Hegseth stood on stage at the Pentagon prayer service next to Wilson in February, he looked at that man and said, "Thank you for your leadership, your mentorship, for the things you've started, the truth you've told, the willingness to be bold. It's the type of thing we are trying to exercise here too." Again, that man that he's talking about does not believe that women should have leadership roles, does not believe they should be able to vote, and believes that slavery was on firm scriptural ground. Wilson's response, when he was asked about the relationship, he told the New York Times that he was more influential than he used to be, and at significantly higher levels. So now, does it make more sense as to why Pete Hegseth has been blocking the promotions of 4 Army officers to be promoted to 1-star general? And this promotion list has about 3 dozen names on it. Most of them are white men. Hegseth went after 4 specifically. 2 are black, 2 are women. He pressed Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll, a Trump appointee, for months to remove these 4 names. Driscoll refused repeatedly because these officers had decades of exemplary service and because the law says that the defense secretary can only approve or reject the entire list, precisely to prevent discriminatory cherry picking. Hegseth, he ignored it and struck the names himself, and it's still unclear whether or not he even had the legal authority to do so. I don't think so, but I'll leave that up to people that are smarter than me. But there was a real gift in all of this news, and it was a moment where the worldview and the policy of Hegseth becomes indistinguishable. And it came from Hegseth's chief of staff, Ricky Buria, who last summer had a confrontation with Driscoll over a different promotion. Major General Antoinette Gant, a combat engineer, served in Iraq and Afghanistan and was being selected to command the Military District of Washington, a role where she would appear alongside the president at Arlington National Cemetery events. And Ricky Buria's argument against promoting this decorated two-combat tour veteran was President Trump would not want to stand next to a black female officer at military events. I'm going to reread that. President Trump would not want to stand next to a black female officer at military events. That is a quote. 11 current and former officials told the Times that it wasn't Gant's record. It wasn't her performance. It wasn't any measurable standard. It was the president's racist and misogynistic aesthetic preferences at Arlington that kept her from getting promoted. And it fits right in with Pete Hegseth and Doug Wilson's worldview that women belong in a particular place and that the hierarchy is divinely ordained, that essentially only white men are worthy. As Wilson's critics have summarized his teachings, translated into federal personnel policy. That's what we've seen this at the Department of Defense. Now, I will say, the Army Secretary reportedly told Buria that the president is not a racist or sexist, and he pushed back, and Antoinette Gant was eventually promoted. But these other four we're talking about, they weren't so lucky. They did not get promoted. And one officer, though, in all of this, was blocked for something that will really get to you. He wrote a paper more than a decade ago exploring why black service members have historically taken support roles instead of frontline combat positions. It was an academic paper about the history of racism in the military. He was blocked for it by the people who are insisting that they oppose racism in the military. Predictably, the Pentagon's calling the whole story fake news from anonymous sources, of course. That would be a little bit more convincing if Pete Hegseth hadn't also fired the first female commandant of the Coast Guard, the first woman to lead the Navy, the first black chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and so on. He's got a record. And at some point, this pattern becomes the statement. His crusader tattoos, his theocratic pastor, the monthly worship services in the Department of Defense. This is not someone whose worldview is a mystery. He's telling you exactly what he believes, and he is translating it directly into a promotion list and into Defense Department policy. 43% of active U.S. military are people of color. They're the ones getting shot at in Iran right now. This is MAGA. And by the way, your subscriptions, your likes, your shares, they help keep us covering stories like this, even when the algorithm doesn't want us to. So do me a favor, hit the notification icon. You will be notified anytime we cover Pete Hegseth and his racist and misogynistic policies.